Now, I have an affinity for Nike running. I continually come back to Nike running. I have over the years, over and over again, because there's just something about running on a Nike that's different than everything else. It wasn't quite as distinct as it is now in 2024. A few years ago, even 5, 6, 7 years ago, it wasn't quite as distinct. But now with how geometry and tech has moved on in running shoes, Nike sort of stands out on its own. And it was something I could never really articulate. What is that Nike feel? What is that thing that keeps me coming back? Even when I try to go run in other shoes and stay away from Nike, as I did earlier this year. And it took staying away from Nike for almost 6 months to really figure this out once and for all. Now, earlier this year, really January through June, when the Peg 41 came out, I didn't really run in anything Nike. I ran in the Vaporfly 3 a few times, maybe 25, 30K. That was mostly to test it against other things I was covering on the channel. But over that first part of 2024, I ran in a lot of different shoes, and a lot of shoes that I typically would not run in, and I cover them on the channel. But primarily, I sort of zoned in on running in Adidas primarily with some Asics. And Adidas and Asics are probably the two brands that are about as far away from the Nike feel as you can possibly get. So when the Peg 41 came out in June, and I fell in love with the Peg 41, in case you can't tell on this channel, it was immediately obvious to me what was going on with Nike. I could finally put my finger on what is the Nike feel. And I think that comes down to really three key things. And the first thing that really distinguishes Nike from really everything else in the marketplace is something that wasn't unique to Nike, but Nike's held on to it since the very early days. And to explain that, let's take a little trip down memory lane of some past Nike shoes. So going way back to 1972 via 2024, and we start with the Nike Cortez. Again, I did a review on the Nike Cortez, and I talked about this shoe at length in a review format. If you want to watch that video, I'll put a link in the description. And I touched on this feel, but what you can actually see here in this shoe is this very flat forefoot. There's very little foam under the toe-off area of this shoe. Now, back in 1972, this was really a max cushion shoe. This was about as cushioned as you could possibly get. But in 2024 eyes, it looks like there's barely anything there. And if you look at the outsole of this shoe, you can see that it's very narrow, but most of the material is directly under the big toe. It's under the toe off. So if we go to some other key Nikes of the past, like the Nike Waffle Trainer, this was really what replaced the Cortez as the primary training shoe in the Nike lineup by about 74 or 75. You can see similar things. There's very little foam under the toe off, and you can look at the forefoot area and it's very flat, and there's a lot of material directly under the big toe. Moving forward into 1977, getting into the Waffle Racer. Now this is a racing flat. This is meant for racing, and various versions of this did exist before 77, but this form of it and this really iconic shape is the 77 onward model. But as you can see here, there's very little material under the forefoot of this shoe, especially on toe off. And that's a really key distinction with Nike currently. So if we look at a Peg 41 from 2024 and I turn it to the medial side and we look at the actual toe off area, you can again see that there's very little foam here in the forefoot, right under the big toe of this shoe. There's a nice flat forefoot, but there's very little foam here. And what that is promoting, and this goes back to the early days of running, is this ability to really dig your toe in and really drive your toe on toe off. So you're getting extra propulsion from digging and pushing your toe into the ground. That's very much something that comes from racing on a track, but Nike's carried that through their line, and it's really part of their lineage. And the fact that it's in a 2024 model, in fact, it's in almost every Nike model, is, I think, something that sets us apart. Now, when the Peg 41 came out, a lot of the initial reviews said they did not like the toe-off feel. And that's because this is so different from every other shoe on the market right now, which are much thicker. They have a lot more rocker. They have the plate that's, aiding you on toe-off. Nike shoes still really emphasize driving, almost gripping your toes into the ground to get that extra bit of propulsion. And that's something that directly comes from Bill Bowerman and his coaching and his ideas on racing. And it's something that you hear a lot with sprinters and track athletes too, about how they drive off their toes, to propel themselves forward. Roadrunners can learn from that too, and it's something, again, that Nike's really emphasized in their lineup, and you can see it very directly here in the Peg 41. But it's not unique just to the Peg 41. Vaporfly 3, we look at the medial side, you'll see that there's very little foam in the toe off of the shoe. And I think the Vaporfly has always been a really interesting modernization of this very drive off the toe Nike feel, because there's a lot of foam in this shoe. This is not a minimal shoe, and there's a carbon fiber plate in this. But this shoe was initially designed with that low plate configuration, meaning the plate is really close to the ground and it drives up into the toe. But also the Nike plate, the fly plate in the Vaporfly, there's more flex in this than there is in other shoes, other carbon fiber plated shoes. So what you're actually getting here when you drive off the toe in a Vaporfly, and this is true of any Vaporfly, any generation, is that you're still driving off the toe. You still can dig your toe into the ground, but now you've loaded up all the ZoomX foam and you flex the plate. So when you're driving off the toe, you're giving all of that system a little more energy, and you get a very explosive pop off the toe in a Vaporfly that's very unique. And I think, again, that's something that sets the Vaporfly apart from really any other super shoe on the market currently. And this is even present in the most cutting edge, top of the line Nike marathon racer, the Alphafly 3. This is the most modern shoe that Nike's making at the moment. But again, if we turn it to the medial side, you'll see proportionally there isn't a lot of foam under the toe off, and there's a big flat area here under the big toe. So again, when you're driving off the toe in this, you've loaded up the AirPods, you've loaded up the ZoomX, you've flexed the plate in the shoe, because again, there's still a somewhat flexible fly plate in the shoe compared to other models, other brands' carbon fiber shoes. Again, you're really driving off the toe, and this shoe really engages digging your toe in and driving off, and you're getting that extra pop or propulsion off the forefoot of the shoe. So much so in this shoe that on my right foot, on my big toe, I get a little bit of a hot spot because I'm able to dig in so much that it's actually causing a little bit of friction in there. It is not optimal, but I can solve that with some various things, Band-Aids, Body Glide, that sort of thing, or just get my toes used to it. But this shoe just allows me to really dig in and push off, and that's very distinctly Nike that really no one else has right now. So let's look at some other brands and start with the Adidas Adizero SL2, because as I said, Adidas is one of those brands that could not be further from the Nike feel. Now, Adidas has really built up their forefoots in the Adizero range, and they've been doing this for years now. And specifically with the Adizero SL2, which is an excellent trainer, it's one of the best of the year, there is a ton of foam under the forefoot of the shoe, especially on toe off. And there's a lot of rockers. So even if you want to get way up on the toe and really dig your toe in, you're never going to get the shoe at that extreme of an angle, because there's so much rocker, and that rocker is going to propel you forward before you dig in. Additionally, there's just so much foam under the forefoot of this shoe, you're just not going to have that same feel. And a lot of the reviewers of this shoe have commented that it does feel like there's a lot of foam under the forefoot of this shoe. And I think a lot of that feel is coming from just how much is under the big toe, because you're getting a lot of perception of how much foam is in the shoe from that feel. Probably the best example of this geometry from Adidas is the Adios Pro 3. Now, looking at the medial side of this shoe has so much foam under the big toe, and there is so much rocker in this shoe that's so late in this shoe that even if you wanted to dig your toe in, you can't. It's not possible. The shoe's going to roll you forward and propel you off the toe well before you can actually get up on the toe. So again, this is Adidas taking the geometry and really pushing in a direction that works for their tech stack, works for their materials. And, Adidas shoes run very well. I really enjoy running in them, but they're just very different from what I expect from Nike. And if we look at ASICS and the Metaspeed Paris series, again, the Edge and the Sky, same shoe to me essentially, just different feel. Look at the forefoot of that shoe. There's even more foam under the toe of that shoe and even more rocker. It's nearly impossible to dig your toe in or even feel the toe off in a Metaspeed or any ASICS shoe for that matter, because they're putting emphasis on loading up the foam, feeling the plate. If there's no plate in an Asics shoe, there's going to be a lot of foam there, so you're engaging the foam or some other technology like the trampoline effect and the Nova Blast, and that's what's propelling you forward. You're just never digging your toe in and pushing off like you can in a Nike. The second thing that really sets the Nike feel apart from everything else is seen in the Vaporfly 3. And if we look at the outsole and the forefoot of the shoe, you can see it very clearly here. It's a very flat, very stable, anchored feel to the ground, meaning the forefoot of the shoe is extremely flat. So when you're rolling forward or you're engaging the forefoot of the shoe to really roll and dig that toe in, you have a very flat platform to do that, which makes the Nike shoe feel very anchored to the ground. Another really good example of that is in the Peg 41. The Peg 41 has a very flat, very wide forefoot, and there isn't as much rocker in this shoe. So this is a very traditional geometry. And again, moving to the medial side, you can see this big flat forefoot that really allows you to push into the toe and really dig that toe in for toe off. Now, this shoe, again, a lot of people commented that it feels like there's no foam under the forefoot of the shoe. It feels like you're directly on the ground. It does, and that's kind of the feel. That's, I think, by design. That's what Nike's going for here. So one of the reasons I've been saying that Nike's really leaned into what's made Nike Nike and what's made the Peg with the Peg 41, because it just encompasses all of that feel, that really great ability to drive the toe in and the flat anchored feeling of the forefoot. It's all here in this shoe. And what's really interesting, if we look at the Nike Cortez, again, we look at the forefoot of this shoe, this could not be flatter in the forefoot of this shoe. And most of the material is right here under the big toe. So again, in the Cortez, you're really landing on a flat, albeit narrow platform, but you're really able to drive off the toe. And even this herringbone outsole pattern that Bill Bowerman loved, he thought it was the best one possible for road racing. This was before the waffle that he invented. This allows you to really dig in and get the most out of the pavement, get the most grip to really push off on the toe. So all of that is coming from this shoe. And just to emphasize it a little bit more with something very modern, if we look at the Alphafly, and again, go to the medial side and look at the forefoot, there's actually a very flat, wide forefoot in here. And in fact, the two AirPods, these two orange pucks under here, which are harder rubber, are actually very flat and they stick up above the rest of the outsole. So when you're landing on the Alphafly, you have a very flat centering platform that's going to roll you forward, and then you're able to dig that toe in. So this is about as far away from the Cortez as you can possibly get, but it still has those attributes. It still has that flat forefoot that allows you to go forward and dig your toe in. It's still present in the Nike lineup. Interestingly, there are a couple shoes that Nike's put out in the past couple years that don't have this flat forefoot. And one of the most popular was the Nike Invincible 1 and 2. They were essentially the same geometry in the outsole. And this shoe didn't have two of those key Nike attributes. So if you look at the medial side, you'll see that there actually is a lot of foam and a lot of rocker under the forefoot of the shoe. Not as much as some other brands. It's still kind of Nike. But the bigger issue with this shoe was that it had two rockers in it. It had the heel to toe rocker, and it also had a subtle rocker across the forefoot of the shoe, which is something I didn't know about until the Invincible 3 came out. And it explains why I really did not like the Invincible 1 or 2, because it just felt unstable to me. It felt like I was always rocking side to side, especially when I was trying to transition off the toe. Interestingly, this was one of Nike's more popular shoes that a lot of people like. So obviously this sort of dual rocker technology is something that a lot of other brands are using, and people seem to respond to it, but it doesn't feel like Nike to me. And in fact, in the Invincible 3, Nike actually went and removed that, and they flattened out the forefoot, especially on the medial side under the big toe. There still was a subtle rocker on the lateral side, especially where you're landing as a forefoot striker, which was somewhat present, but on the medial side it was very flat, and this shoe ran very differently. And it wasn't the Strobel board, it wasn't the upper, it wasn't a lot of the changes to this shoe. I think the geometry change of flattening out the forefoot really changed the characteristic from bouncy and bounding and what people like the Invincible 1 and 2 to something that's much more Nike. And a lot of the people that are also Nike fans that I've run with in the past that really have always gravitated to Nike like myself they all gravitated to this shoe because I think of what I'm actually pointing out here. One of the most extreme shoes that had all of these rocker angles working across the length of the shoe and the width of the shoe was the Adidas Adios Pro 3. Now, as I pointed out, this shoe had a ton of foam under the forefoot, under the big toe especially. It had a heel-to-toe rocker, a very late-stage forefoot rocker. This shoe just kept rolling you forward, and you always felt like you were on endless foam, just constantly on a big platform of foam, no matter where you were in your stride or where you were impacting this shoe. But across the forefoot, a little bit behind the ball of the foot, it was very flat. However, in front of the forefoot, under the big toe, it was flat. However, there was a secondary rocker that was under the rest of the toes, which could be a little distracting, especially for people who supinate, like myself. It could feel like I always wanted to roll out, especially if I was on a heavy cambered road or very bad pavement. This shoe would often feel very unstable to me, and that was again because of all these angles in the forefoot of this shoe. And lastly, I think the last thing that's really part of the Nike feel is the high drop, the 8 to 10 mil drop, which a lot of people don't seem to like anymore. I've noticed a big preference lately, I would say in the past year, 18 months, of a lot of people wanting 6 to 8, even 4 to 6 as kind of the normal drop in a shoe. But again, looking at the Alphafly 3, you can see this very exaggerated heel drop in this shoe. This isn't only an 8 mil drop, but it looks much more exaggerated, which is why I'm pointing it out. But what this does for really any Nike feel and any Nike shoe is really emphasize putting you up on your toes, especially in their faster race shoes. In the Alphafly 3, it always feels like you're up on the forefoot of the shoe and it's always ready to dig in and toe off. Even if you're heel striking in the shoe, you're absorbing and it's immediately putting you onto the forefoot and it's going to propel you off the toe. You can also see this very clearly in the Vaporfly. The Vaporfly has, again, 8 mil drop, and it feels like an 8 mil drop. This shoe will absorb wherever you're landing, and it gets you into the flat forefoot so you can dig the toe off. Again, that higher drop, around 8 mil for Nike race shoes and around 10 mil for Nike trainers, 9 to 10 mil lately. That, again, just emphasizes all the flat forefoot and the ability to dig into your toes and drive forward. So again, those three things I think really combine to make the Nike feel in my mind. So those three things together I think really contribute to what I call the Nike feel. And it may seem like very subtle things, but that's sort of what running shoes are. I think there's a lot of subtle geometries and a lot of subtle design and engineering decisions that go into a running shoe, whether it's a trainer or a racer or something in between. And Nike definitely seems to continually lean into the three things that I talked about in this video. And it's why I keep coming back to the brand. I have affinity for the brand. Aesthetically, I like the brand. I like the products they put out. But even if I try to stay away, I always come back because there's a feel there that I just can't get. Now, in the past, a lot of what I just talked about wasn't unique to Nike. But I would say since the super shoe revolution really started, really 2018, 2019, as other brands explored thicker midsoles, more rockers, stiffer plates, almost all of them have moved in completely different directions, closer to what Adidas and Asics are doing. Though there are some brands like Saucony, which sort of thread the line. They have some shoes that are leveraging a plate and rocker, and there's a lot of foam under the forefoot. And they have other shoes that are very minimal and very flat under the forefoot and probably run a lot more like a Nike does. Think like the Saucony Sinister or maybe one of the Convaras, especially when they're broken in. But they're not the norm across the line. And you can still find shoes that have that ability to drive in off the toe, a very flat forefoot and a higher drop across really any brand. They're out there, but they're not the norm anymore. Nike's really the only one leaning into that anymore. And I think, again, that's what sets Nike apart right now as far as the Nike feel. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this type of content interesting, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.